One of our speakers was Mike Adkins. Mike Adkins was a singer. He had records, and he had the most unique music style you've ever heard. He sang, "The Lord has led forth his people with joy, and his chosen ones with singing." And he wrote a lot of those kinds of songs, but they weren't doing much. He'd go and preach in a church, and he was kind of popular in the charismatic movement. He'd speak in a lot of the charismatic meetings, but his records weren't selling very well. And he was praying, "God, I want to have my albums get out there so people can hear them and they can worship you." And he said, "I want to have a successful ministry." So he was praying for a successful ministry, and one day he looked out his window, and there was old weird Norman across the street. Nobody wanted to hang out with Norman. He was weird. Yup. Norman didn't understand physical hygiene, and so he had a smell to him, and people didn't understand. They all called him old weird Norman, crazy Norman. And Mike was looking out his window, and the Lord said, and Norman was over there trying to start a lawnmower, and he couldn't get it started. And the Lord spoke to Mike and said, "Mike, go over and help him start his lawnmower." And he said, "Oh, Lord, if I go over and help him start his lawnmower, he's going to want to talk to me. And if he talks, he smells." And the Lord said, "Go help him." The Lord didn't alter his original words. So Mike said, "All right." And he went across and says, "Norman, you need some help starting that lawnmower?" And Norman said, Yep. So Mike cleaned the spark plug a little bit and did a few things and started the lawnmower for Norman. And then the Lord said, "Invite him over to your house to watch the 700 Club." And Mike said, "Lord, if I invite him over to my house, he's going to want to sit in my chair. If he sits in my chair's going to stink." He made all these excuses. And the Lord didn't change his original word. "Mike, invite Norman over to your house to watch the 700 Club." And so he said, "Norman, you wouldn't want to come over to my house and watch the 700 Club, would you?" And Norman said, Yep. So he took Norman over to his house, and sure enough, Norman plopped right down in Mike's favorite chair. And they turned on the 700 Club and watched it. And when the 700 Club was over, the Lord said, "Now, Mike, ask Norman if he'd like to know me." And Mike said, "Norman, would you like to know Jesus?" And Norman said, Yep. And right there in Mike's living room, he prayed the prayer of salvation with Norman, and Norman was born again. And the Lord said, "Now go over to Norman's house." And he went over to Norman's house. Norman's house was like it had never been cleaned. And he says, "Help Norman clean the house." And he said he had to take putty knives to scrape the goo off the floors in the bathroom. And he said, "Now teach Norman hygiene." And so he had to teach Norman hygiene. He said, "Now take Norman to the dentist and get his teeth fixed." And Mike is just obeying the Lord. It seems totally unrelated with having record albums sell. But this is about a surrendered heart. So Mike took him to the dentist, got his teeth fixed. And him and Norman became pretty good buddies. You see, Norman was just a kid when his mother died, and then his dad was killed in a mining accident. And Norman was left to basically raise himself. He was living in that same house. And Norman and Mike became good friends. They'd go to the Dairy Queen every week. But something else happened. All of a sudden, one of the national Christian television networks had Mike as a guest on the program. And the Lord spoke and said, "I want you to give him a free half-hour program every week." And so now Mike goes from speaking in little churches and little charismatic meetings to national prominence overnight, and his records became the #1 selling gospel records in the 70s. Now, what does that have to do with old Norman? Well, he wrote a song called "Norman, Jesus Loves You" that was big back then. And Mike talks about this. He has a video out now on seed planting, and he said how God told him to give somebody a pickup truck. He gave a pickup truck, and then Mike, next thing you know, is driving home with his own bus. One thing after another, how he learned these kingdom laws. But a perfect heart is a surrendered heart. Yes, Lord, I'm going to do it the way you say, not the way I say.